Welcome to Talking About Midlife, where we talk about life living in a female body in our midlife. We talk about health, love, relationships, our inner world, aging, death, motherhood, and what it means to be a human at this time in the world. I am Kelly Sterling, and I hope you enjoyed listening to these stories that I'm sharing. Hi, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to talk about the mysteries of midlife, or the mystical side of midlife. We have been led to believe, through popular culture really, and I guess shaming the midlife transition. We call it a midlife crisis and we make fun of people, and there's 1,000 stories being written over the last 20 or 30 years about, particularly for men, the classic midlife crisis. Midlife's not a crisis. Midlife is an awakening. It is waking up to the truth of yourself. Waking up to really finding out, who are you? It's about learning to heal your inner child, your childhood wounds, and the strategies that you created as a small person to stay safe and to survive in the world that you've been using for a very long time. So if you're listening to this and you're in your late 30s, maybe you're in your 40s or your 50s, and you feel like you're in some sort of midlife crisis, you might be going through menopause as well. It's not a crisis. You're waking up. How do we know that it's starting? Well, often we want to make big changes in our life. Some of us make big career changes. Some of us feel like we can no longer pretend to be anything but ourselves. We have to be our most authentic selves. Some of us, we feel a lot. We feel a lot of sensation, a lot of emotion. We might be very sad. We might have a lot of grief. We might be really angry. And that's part of the waking up process, is now that we see how our strategies have been getting in the way for us. Or maybe I find with a lot of women, they've been in intense mothering periods, and when you're going through that, you never put yourself first, and your body, particularly in midlife, if you're in perimenopause, that really dictates that you learn to put yourself first, because it's sort of fundamental from a health and well-being perspective. We need a lot of rest. We need to eat really well. We need to take very good care of ourselves. And so what I notice with a lot of people is that there's a lot of irritation, frustration, anger, sometimes rage. So in that high sympathetic arousal but fight energy that comes up for a lot of people, and they don't know where it's coming from. Often it's coming from seeing misjustice, seeing that no one's looking after them. Who's looking out for you? This is a time where you have to put yourself first, where you can't be looking out for everyone else all the time. That's really hard to do when you have little kids. It's almost impossible. If you've got teenagers, it's a little bit more manageable, but you still need to be keeping an eye on them. And if you've got sick parents, once again, you're stuck in a caretaking role. And a lot of emotion can come up from that, particularly with parents, I think, where maybe there's not been a good relationship with them. Maybe they're emotionally abusive or neglectful when you were younger, and you're now having to take care of them. I imagine it would be hard not to be pissed off and furious about that situation. When I started my midlife transition, I read really widely about this, because I realized really quickly I've did a lot of work in culture change for years before I moved into life coaching and somatic experiencing work. And I realized that so many of us internalize messaging from the cultures that we grew up in, whether it's family systems, social systems, just work culture, popular culture. And that then drives belief systems of how we think things are or should be in the world. And what I find with a lot of people in midlife is that they outgrow these belief systems. They realize that everything that they thought to be true is not. And that can be really, really disappointing. So I read really widely and I got into archetype work. Archetypes are really interesting because they provide us with a roadmap of a conceptual way of being, of understanding. One of the feminine archetypes that I found especially useful for all people, regardless of gender, to help them understand this transition is to understand the story of Hestia. So Hestia was one of the original Olympians. She's a sister of Zeus, daughter of Kronos and Rhea. And Hestia was probably the least dramatic and crazy of all the Greek gods and goddesses. She's probably the most drama-free. She's the one that can be counted on to support the community, to provide stability and warmth. So in Greek mythology, she's called Hestia, and in Roman mythology, she's called Vestia. So if you have been to Rome, down to Circus Maximus and the Colosseum, down in that area is the temple of the Vestal Virgins. This is the temple of Vestia. So her role was to provide warmth, stability, and shelter. She kept the fires burning in the hearth of the community so that when the gods and the goddesses came home from their grand voyages, their grand wars sometimes, she was the one that kept everything going. So she's the grandmother energy, the wise woman energy. She really wants you. What does Hestia want for us, or Vestia? She wants us to be easier on ourselves, to be able to curl up with a cup of tea and a blanket and sit by the fire and look at all that you've accomplished and give yourself a break. Give your mind a break from all the demands that you place on yourself. And I feel like in midlife, we really need this time of rest and a break, because midlife is about moving from your first adulthood. This comes from Jungian work, by the way, this concept. First adulthood, which is very much driven by external influence. So often people are establishing their career, establishing themselves in work, creating a family. So a lot of doing stuff, to moving to our second adulthood, which is very much soul driven. So the soul, I'm going to use the word soul and psyche interchangeably probably, psyche being the Greek word for soul. What do we really want? Who are we? So the developmental challenge of midlife is being radically honest with ourselves. And the thing with life transitions is you have these developmental challenges and you have issues that come up, in adolescence, and then when you become a parent, and then midlife, and then elderhood, these big life transitions. If you don't deal with whatever's appearing your way, it will hang around until your next life transition. It will plague you. So midlife is very much about moving from an external orientation to an internal orientation, being able to orient the world. So some might call it your intuition. I call it soul. I think it's about coming back to your soul and knowing that internal compass. Now, this is challenging because to do this, you have to heal your childhood wounds, you have to heal your trauma, because often what happens, we develop strategies as kids through traumatic experiences to keep us safe. And we all have exposure to trauma. It doesn't have to be the big T stuff. We all have trauma. By definition is when your nervous system has been overwhelmed. And so you create a strategy to compensate for that. It's not the story of what happened to you, it's the event and your nervous system, your body not being able to save you. So we store all of that in our body and they become adaptive patterns, and they look like personality, but they're not. Sometimes they're also inherited traits that are passed down through family systems. So when you do the healing work, you heal that ancestral trauma, you stop it from being passed down to the next generation. So it's very much about doing that healing work, because those old strategies that you used in childhood and adolescence and early adulthood, they are no longer serving you in some way, shape or form. And your body will tell you that. And you will experience this through illness, physical or mental health. You will experience it through big emotions, through sensations, through deep longing and yearning for something else. The thing that you are longing for is the real you. So our soul is calling us back. Be honest, like, where are you? Where are you at right now? Heal this. And this is the mystical part of midlife transition. And then some women might be listening to this and go, but what about menopause? Like, that throws a spanner and everything. Well, it does, but it's part of it. Because our hormonal changes foster our development through various stages in our life. They are not a mutually exclusive thing. It's all interconnected. So the transition through menopause is an all-encompassing one, and it is part of midlife transition. You cannot separate it out. It's physical, psychological, sociological, and cultural. It's all part of the same thing. Everyone goes through a midlife transition. Female bodies also have the end of their fertility wrapped into that, because you're now transitioning through this portal, which is midlife. You know, my friend Diane Shepherd calls menopause the passion portal. What are you really passionate about? And the thing that I love about Hestia is that her question to you is am I a safe place to be? When we have a lot of trauma in our bodies, no, we're not a safe place to be, because we don't feel safe in our own bodies. So the Hestia's intention, and where she wants us to focus our attention, is on ourselves, like finding home within ourselves, that the most sacred sanctuary that we can find is within us. She wants us to be able to do that healing work, whatever its nature is, so that we can light that small fire within ourselves and feel safe in our own body, that we can come back to ourselves. Our anchor is our soul. She wants us to be able to find that sanctuary within us, to come home to ourselves, to give ourselves the love that we effortlessly give other people. Can we give it to ourselves? She wants us to be able to become the calm harbour for our soul to be able to sail into and dock and port and thrive. Come home to the truth of who you are. With those early adaptive strategies, we tend to disconnect from parts of ourselves. We only show the world small parts of ourselves. And so sometimes why people have a big crisis is literally there's an eruption that comes from deep within that they can't pretend. anymore. They want to show the world the depth of themselves. They want to show the world who they really are. If you project that outward, you will seek it in other. You will try and find it in another person, either through an affair or crazy friendships, or, it might be through different activities that you do. Find it within you. Be that safe anchor for yourself. When you can do that, when you can give that to yourself, that sets you up for growth in your emotional maturity. It sets you up for an emotional adulthood. It sets you up to transition well into your second half of life, to be an emotionally mature elder. You don't become an elder by becoming old. Emotional maturity is not a given if you don't do the deep work. This is what the midlife transition is all about. And that's why I think Hestia or Vestia is such a good story, such a good archetypal story to understand really what it's all about. Hestia represents warmth, protection, and sanctuary when we know we are home. Our home is within us, in our heart. If you have enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to know more about the mysteries of midlife, you can check out my ebook, which you can find on my website, Magical Midlife and Menopause, where I talk all about this in detail. And I also have my midlife masterclasses, and there's one on the spiritual part of midlife transition. There's 6 masterclasses there that might be really helpful for you to broaden the depth of your understanding about midlife transition. When you deeply understand what is going on, it makes it so much easier. It gives you context. It helps you be more patient with yourself. It helps you find the grace that you need to give yourself the time and space you need to find that safe harbour within yourself. Thanks for listening today, and I hope you have a great week.